G'day, I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
And you're listening to our very, very, very special episode of the Doctor Who show where, Dave, we are in a hotel room together.
Yes. That didn't quite sound how we meant it to sound.
No, it didn't, but let's go with it.
I'm visiting the Emerald City where, of course, Rob lives.
Yes.
And we've got together in my hotel room to record this podcast.
Yes, if you've been on the social medias out there, you'll know we asked you a few days ago, do you have any questions for us? We're going to do a Reddit-style Ask Me Anything or Ask Us Anything show. We'll see where it goes. We've got a lot of great questions from a lot of great listeners, Dave.
And just to reassure listeners, this isn't all we're doing. We did catch up for lunch beforehand.
Oh, yes, we've had a lovely lunch as well. Everything's happening. The temperature is wonderful. Last time you were here, Dave, it was about 42 degrees.
Yes.
It's not like that today. Everything's happening. It's a beautiful day.
It is. So we asked for questions on any topic, Doctor Who, sci-fi, world politics, whatever.
Yes.
And we've got a good variety. Shall we get going?
Let's get going.
Well, the first question is from Mark Cockram. Good to hear from you, Mark. And he says, you have to listen to one of these on a continuous loop for 72 hours straight. What's your poison? The theme tune for Capaldi's tenure or the Delaware version?
Ooh, they're both not great, but I think the Delaware version has all those awful electronic sounds in it. I think that would drive me crazier faster than the Capaldi version, even though I'm not particularly fond of the Capaldi version.
Look, I'm not fond of either of them, but I'm going to go the opposite to you, Rob. Because at least the Delaware version's got enough weird things in it that I would just maybe be able to keep myself sane for a little bit longer. It's like, there's the strange bubble bath noise, and there's the strange sink noise.
Okay.
So, but neither's good, so thank you for that torturous start off, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Peter Field says, Rob and Dave, what are your most treasured collections or memorabilia? Would you be interested in doing a collector's guide to Doctor Who one day? What is the best stuff in your respective collections? There's a few questions there.
Wow. Thank you, Peter. Most treasured, it's hard to isolate one particular item.
I wonder if he means Doctor Who or anything. What are your most treasured collections? Like, I have a collection of medals, for example.
Oh, I think he means Doctor Who.
Okay, well, let's go with Doctor Who.
Most treasured, in some ways, the complete set of targets I've got.
Yeah.
Because that was a sort of a lifetime project to get a complete set of targets, which also includes all the Virgin MAs, all the Virgin NAs, and a couple of other things as well. So that's something I quite like to have in my possession. I'm very fond of like the stuff I had as a kid. So the now very battered and bruised Imperial Dalek from Dapol that I got as a present when we went to see the Museum of the Moving Image in London in 1991.
I have one of those, yes.
So that's there. And a couple of those early things I had, like my copy of the technical manual, which was sold out here in abundance. I think everyone out here had a copy of that.
Every child, yes.
Back in the early 80s. And that just had some great pictures and everything. So that's probably my most treasured one. The best stuff, I would say, has to be my copy of Time Frame, which I know, Rob, you've seen before, which has 4 pages of autographs, including 7 Doctors, a bunch of companions, Terence Dicks.
Yeah.
So
you have got in person.
That I've got in person, yes, that's right. So that's probably my most important one. I'll let you answer those questions and we can then talk about the collector's guide.
Yeah, because I have thoughts on that too. I agree with the targets because I have the set of targets. I have the set of NAs. I have the set of MAs. I've got all the EDAs. Wow. So I've got a lot of novels. And I've also got a lot of the coffee table books, like the Haining books and stuff. But I think you're right. I think the target books are where it's at because that's the start of my fandom and that's what I collected when I was a kid. And it's great to have the set of those.
And they're also something that I actually do pull off the shelf.
Yes.
And I do read them, I do look at them. Whereas I've got some wonderful hardback books that I honestly haven't looked at in 10, if not 20 years. Like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. They were fantastic hardbacks. But do I ever pull them out now as reference guides?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. What is the best stuff in my collection? Probably the stuff that it took me the longest to collect and which impresses a lot of people when they see it is I have the set of Doctors, and by the set I mean it's Doctors 1 through 6, and the set of villains, and there are 6 villains, as pewter busts on a wooden plinth, and it's a plinth of 6 Doctors and a plinth of 6 villains. And when people see that, it's from about 1986, 87 sort of vintage. I saw them in my first issue of Doctor Who magazine, and I thought, I'll have those. And it took me about 3 decades to get them. When people see those, they're like, I've never seen that before. That's really cool. And that's probably it for me. Yeah.
I always wanted the pewter chess set when I was a teenager.
Yes.
But it cost a fortune in the UK, double that to get it posted to Australia.
Yes.
And unlike a few other things that I wanted in the 90s and could never get, that I've since gone on eBay and picked them up at a fairly good price, that is not cheap still.
No.
And I also sort of, the problem with the chess set is you've got to put out a chessboard.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have a proper stand or a table, like you can't just put it on a shelf. So that would be lovely, but I can't justify it.
Yeah. Now this question of would we be interested in doing an episode, a collector's guide, I think we know someone, and you know him particularly well, who'd want to be involved with that if we did it.
Yes.
And we're thinking of the same person? Richard, yes.
Yes, Richard would be fantastic at that. Look, I don't know a lot about merchandise. I know what I've bought, I know what I like, but I don't really, I couldn't tell you the value of different things and all the rest of it. You did used to do, before I joined the show, Rob, the Hootiques Roadshow, though.
Yes.
Which was a little bit down that path where someone would talk about a particular piece of merchandise.
And what it's worth, yeah.
Yeah, if there was interest, we could certainly do a special on that, but I think we'd need someone like Richard to come on and actually give us some expertise.
And we'd have to cherry pick what was in it, because I have a copy at home of Howe's Transcendental Toy Box.
Yep.
And I think it's got prices in it, but they'd be radically out of date now. It's from decades ago. But you flick through that, and that's before tons and tons and tons of merch has come out in the last couple of decades. There is so much Doctor Who stuff out there. It's almost impossible to talk about all the merch. You know, you could just talk about 60s Dalek merch and fill a show.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is that I imagine eBay has radically changed the market.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when if you wanted a collectible, you'd have to wait for someone to come physically to a convention or a meeting or an event to sell their collection.
Yeah.
Or hear about it on the grapevine, whereas now someone can put something up on eBay and literally anyone from around the world can go and buy that. So there's some stuff therefore that increases in price because there's one of them and everybody around the world's competing for it. But there's others where it's like, well, I know I can go on eBay and get a copy of this anytime I want. So it just doesn't sell. So yeah, the world has definitely changed.
It sure has.
The next one is from the We're All Stories at the End podcast, who ask, have you and Rob ever had a major disagreement running the podcast?
Boring answer. No.
No, we've never had a disagreement. A couple of times we've gone in directions during recording and we've like, where's he going? I think our review of Power of the Doctor was one where you were going down these multiple rabbit holes. I was like, hang on, we've got former doctors and former companions. You want to talk about rabbit holes? Rob, come on, what's going on? And a few of our listeners were like, that got a little bit narky. There's been a few times when one of us has pitched something and the others said no.
Or put it off for a while.
There was one when Carrie Fisher died and you were quite keen, Rob, to do a Let's Turn on the Mics and do an episode about that. And I just said to you, look, I don't have anything to say. I didn't grow up with her in the same way you did. I didn't have a thing for her in the same way you did. And I actually didn't quite like her performance in Star Wars particularly. So I actually don't have anything to say. And I think I'd be quite a down on that. And you said, okay, well, we won't do that.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of times I've pitched ideas and you've said, I thought about that. I could see the first 5 minutes being great. Not sure where we get half an hour from, and then I've gone, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. But no, I don't think we've ever had a proper disagreement.
No. I think we're both very agreeable people, and if something's not going to work for the other, then we just don't do it.
Well, at the end of the day, it is a hobby.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're doing this because you have to, not because you enjoy it, something's gone wrong somewhere.
Yeah, it's not a job. Okay. 2 questions here. I'll read them together because they cover similar territory. The first is from Oscar Groucho's on Twitter. He says, Doctor Who succeeded in 2005 because it had a fresh approach to the format. What narrative/production amendments does 2025 Doctor Who need to maintain relevance in the streaming landscape? And Kevin Bianco, who is KevyB0712 on Twitter, says, I'm interested to know, do you think Doctor Who on TV would benefit from clearing the decks of continuity and mythos and having a hard reboot? Surprised RTD did not with Eccleston, and really surprised RTD2 didn't with Disney and Shooty coming on board.
Well, my answer to Oscar's question is Kevin's question.
Yeah.
I've been saying for a while, I said it softly in 2005, but But then 05 happened, it was really cool, so I sort of demurred from it. But I'm very much on the bandwagon now that Doctor Who needs a really hard reset. There's just too much collected lore, continuity, ideas, expectations that either you're stuck with things you don't want to be stuck with, or when you do a radical change, it pisses the wrong people off, or pisses the right people off, however you want to put it. And I think there's a lot more you could write if you just took a year or two off, hit the reset button, and came back, and you had the very first Doctor. And then you could have the TARDIS however you wanted to create the TARDIS. At some point he meets the Daleks for the very first time, and the Daleks can be imagined with the backstory of whatever you want it to be. At some point he meets the Master for the very first time, and that can again be set up the way you want to set it up. You can do the Cybermen however you want to do the Cybermen. And look, I'm sure there will be certain things you wouldn't change. Would the TARDIS still be a police box? Probably. Yeah. Do the Daleks still look like basically what the Daleks look like? And are they still mutants and all the rest of it? Yeah, of course. But that would be it. Yeah. So you can do whatever you want to do. You can have whatever Gallifreyan lore you want to have. And yes, there'll be some fans that would just never quite cope with the idea that we've ditched 60 years of continuity. But yeah, I think the best thing for the show would be an absolute wipe of the slate and to start again and tell the stories you want to tell unencumbered by what has been.
I'm surprised you say it like that, because I always think of you as being quite a traditionalist, almost conservative, and that's not a conservative view of it at all.
No, which I think reflects how far the show has just come, and just how embuggered the show is by just this continuity that, well, if you do Davros, it has to be X, Y, Z. And you can't do this in the Master. I think the show's, whether you like the Ncuti Gatwa era or not, Ncuti Gatwa has injected a certain amount of freshness in there, but it still feels encumbered by what it's been. You bring Neil Patrick Harris in as the Celestial Toymaker, and even that's got to be like, well, it's a character from 1966, so therefore we're trapped by X, Y, Z, rather than just, hey, we've just introduced the Toymaker, and he can be anything you want, because there's not a 1966 version. So look, you're right, the fact that I've got there probably says how much I feel about where we've got stuck.
I think it can work, but only if the show's been gone for a while, and this ties into Kevin saying that, he was surprised RTD didn't do it when Eccleston showed up, because the show had been gone for a while then, and it would sort of make sense. But the show is still with us right now. To turn around in 2 years' time and say this is all new, when there's an audience still of young people who would remember Ncuti Gatwa was the 15th Doctor 2 years ago. I mean, with Battlestar Galactica it made sense. It was this old show from the 70s, and a lot of people hadn't even seen it, and then they made the new Battlestar Galactica. That was fantastic. That reboot worked beautifully, and I think Doctor Who could have worked, Kevin, yes, if RTD had done it then, but I'm not sure you can do it only with a 2-year break. I think too many people would be confused, freak out, and all that.
Yeah, look, maybe you do need a longer break, but it's also interesting, as you say that, Rob, the Eccleston era didn't make it explicit it was a continuation for a while. It really wasn't until, I think, a couple of seasons in where they showed those pictures of the old Doctors. When we got Liz Sladen as Sarah Jane in season 2, they only very slowly started to acknowledge that there was a past. And I think RTD may have been keeping it open that maybe if this doesn't quite work how I think it's going to work, we can just call it a reset. So I think he definitely had that open,
Interesting.
Another from We're All Stories at the End podcast. What are the best NAs, MAs, EDAs for people who don't know the Rangers to check out?
Well, I'll talk to EDAs because I know those best.
Sure.
I can't really talk to NAs and MAs having read most of them because I haven't read most of them. But EDAs, you start with something a crowd pleased like Alien Bodies. It's a novel that everyone who reads it, just about everyone, loves. And that introduces faction paradox into the 8th Doctor stories, which then continues into things like Interference Books 1 and 2, which if you think Alien Bodies is a mind-bending sort of read, just go and read the 2 Interference books. And then Faction Paradox continues through till you get something like The Ancestor Cell, which isn't actually written by Lawrence Miles, but you can sort of follow a really cool story with Faction Paradox there. Later in the range, where the Doctor, I'm trying not to be spoilerific, but he loses one of his hearts and gets involved with a fella called Sabbath. That's an interesting run of stories as well. So for the EDAs, it's the Faction Paradox stuff and the Sabbath stuff really does it for me. And then here and there are, that was a good one-off sort of adventure as well. But for thematic stuff, that's what I would go for.
Yeah, look, Alien Bodies is the one that everybody jumps on in that sort of first 10 books. I would also throw War of the Daleks out there, which is very continuity heavy. And if you've come from the classic series, that's probably a nice comfy blanket to get involved with.
It's a bit fan-wanky.
It's a bit fan-wanky, but it also is very familiar. So
yes.
But if you did that and Alien Bodies, I think you get a very good balance of the two.
Yeah.
Going to the Virgin books, look, when people ask this, you don't want to give the absolute best one because then the rest of the range is never quite living up to it. But I think if you ignore the Time Worm and Cat's Cradle books, which, look, they've got some good books in there, but they're very encumbered by the umbrella themes. And if you read the first two standalones, Nightshade and Love and War, between the two of those, I think you get a very good idea of what the range can do. One's a very trad book, one's a very rad book, and they're both really good early stories that I think would get you onto there. The Virgin Missing Adventures is harder because there's obviously 6 different Doctors, so there's different ways to do it. Look, any of the Gareth Roberts books will definitely see you right. Romance of Crime is a favourite of mine, which is a 4th Doctor one. For the Hartnell era, The Plotters is really, really good. If you want something a bit darker and sort of showing how they can move away from the TV series, The Killing Ground, which is a 6th Doctor and the Cyberman one, is really good as well. Or if you just want something that's very safe, something like David A. McGinty's 5th Doctor story, Lords of the Storm, would do you well. Or indeed, if you want a lot of continuity, Gary Russell's Scars of Injustice is absolutely right there for you. So depending what you want out of that range, there's a few different options for you.
Well, they're good because you only have to read one novel.
Yes.
When I say with the EDAs, read the Sabbath stuff, you got to read a ton of books. But in the MAs, you can just read these as one-off stories.
Yeah, absolutely you can. Yeah. And look, we weren't asked about the PDAs, but I always say to people, read Face of the Enemy, because Face of the Enemy is a stunningly good book. However you want to look at it, and it's just one of the best uses of the Master in any form of Doctor Who, anywhere, in my view.
Agree. Simon Burrows writes to us, "Hey guys, great when you can be in the same location from time to time."
Yay.
Quite right. My question is, and I hope it's not too negative, but what would it take for you to give up reviewing the new Doctor Who? Other than illness or some such, what would it take for you to stop the hot takes? I wasn't thinking of a dollar value, although feel free to go down that road if you want, but what would the show have to do to make you give it up?
So again, looking behind the curtain on the podcast, when Rob first suggested to me that we should do hot takes, and we decided to use the upcoming series Class as a bit of a sort of a trial run to see if, how the format would work and how we thought about doing it.
Yeah.
I said I was definitely up for it, but I wanted an agreement that if we reached a point where either of us wasn't enjoying a series, we would stop doing them.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the trigger would have to be not just there were a couple of stories in a row I didn't like, but I'm actually not enjoying the fundamentals of this series.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's particularly entertaining to the listener. I don't think it's particularly good on my time or your time, Rob, if every week after week we're getting up, watching an episode, and getting on the podcast and going, well, I still fundamentally don't like this series. And particularly reaching a point of the only reason I'm now watching this is to do a podcast about it. That to me is just not healthy. The only time that would have happened for me is Series 6. I've spoken about this many times on the podcast. I did stop watching that series. I got through the first half, didn't enjoy it. I thought, look, they're having a break. We'll see what they come back with after the break. They came back with Let's Kill Hitler.
Yeah.
And I just said, okay, I'm out.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to keep watching this series. Had we been doing hot takes, I absolutely would have just said, Rob, sorry, I'm out. I was very worried during the last series.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think much of Space Babies. I really hated The Devil's Cord.
But then we got to Boom.
And had Boom been of the same vein as those first two, I was genuinely thinking, right, how do I have the conversation with Rob? I'm not sure I want to keep doing this. Fortunately, Boom happened, and then we got
73
yards and the like.
Dot and Bubble.
Yeah. I liked Rogue, you didn't, but we had a good chat.
Yeah.
There were enough good episodes in that we were able to go, but that was the closest. Space Babies and Devil's Cord, I had in the back of my mind, as I want to do, just for planning my conversations, like, how do I approach the subject with Rob? That maybe I don't want to do this. And, would I be okay if Rob continued with a guest or all the rest of it? But it didn't happen. But that would be my trigger. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, very similar. I think if everything had been to use the most recent example, if everything had been of the quality of Space Babies and The Devil's Chord, I might have had to have started to think about it. But that wasn't the case. As we say, some good stories came in. And even something like Rogue, which I didn't particularly like, I could still see what they were trying to do, and I could see the value in it for some people. And I don't equate Rogue with Space Babies in the slightest.
Yep.
Even though I didn't like either of them. I don't think they're the same beast at all. So I'm kind of always hoping for something better in the next episode. So I think it would take until the end of a series, and I'd have to turn around and say, well, that whole series was for me to get there. Otherwise, when episodes 1 and 2 have been horrible, I'm still hoping episode 3 is going to be great, or 4 might be great. I still have that hope and that interest because I've watched this show for decades since I was a kid, and I want it to be better, and I still have that hope. So yeah, it'll take till the end of a season, but it could happen, and we're both agreeable people. So if it does happen, the other will agree to knock it on the head, I think.
Yeah.
And we'll just do the monthly show.
Yeah.
Or just do list makers or whatever we do.
Yeah. This one is specifically for you, Rob.
Oh.
It comes from Philip Edney. Hi, Phil. Question for Rob. That's you.
Mm-hmm. That's me.
So, what would it take to get you to attend a live Doctor Who event? And did something happen that has caused you trepidation in attending?
Wow.
Now we've talked about this privately, Rob, but
yes.
You're now going to tell the world.
The mic is mine. Well, hello, Phil. I guess Phil has an interest in this for listeners out there because Phil runs live events and probably sees you, Dave, at his Melbourne events, but doesn't see me at his Sydney events.
No, that's true. And we've spoken about all the ones I've been to, and it's been very positive.
Yeah, exactly. I think the simple answer is a lack of interest. That's about as simple as I can put it. When I was growing up, I went to events that had Doctor Who guests at them. I was very excited to see them. I then went through a period of a couple of decades, where I didn't do any fanish type things and sort of fell out of doing that sort of thing. In my working career then, I worked for places like Paramount Pictures, where I met a lot of celebrity types and actor-y types, people who have done far and away bigger things than Doctor Who actors have done, and I became maybe quite blasé about meeting them. So I sit here and think about an event, a live event, and think, I'm not sure I'm interested in going at all. So it's not trepidation at all. It's just a lack of interest. And I say all of this sitting here opposite someone who goes to these events. So I'm not trying to say, oh, I don't go to these events, look how good I am, and you still go to these events. Well, what's wrong with you? I'm very excited when you go to events, and there have been times where, like when you saw Christopher Eccleston, I said, let's turn on the microphones and hear how the day went. I'm very excited to hear how events go and what people think of them. They're just not for me. And having said all of that, if my old Doctor Who crew was still here in Sydney, it might be a different story. If Mark Douglas, who listens to the podcast, hello Mark, still lived in Sydney rather than in London, he's got his young son Zach. If Zach said, I want to see Sylvester McCoy, and Mark said, well, I'm going to take Zach to see Sylvester McCoy, Rob, do you want to come? I'd probably go because I'm going with an old contact. If Rob McKnight, who works for Channel 7, people might know him from the TV Black Box website and things like that. Rob McKnight's one of my old muckers from those days. If Rob McKnight said to me, Rob, I'm going to do this, I might go, but he lives in Brisbane. So this probably isn't dissimilar, Dave, to you going to events with your old pals from times past, and it's a social aspect as well as seeing the person on stage. And if that was the case, maybe that would get me over the line. Now, I don't need listeners to write in and say, oh, Rob, we'll adopt you. Come with us. We've got a crew of people. I'm talking about people I've known for decades and decades. That's the kind of person who could probably drag me in. Otherwise, and this anecdote's probably gone on too long, I'll just stay away because it's just not for me, really. Yeah,
it's definitely a lot easier for me to go along to the ones in Melbourne, knowing that people like Richard, Mark, Tom, Dave, etc., they're all going to be there, and I'm going to see them, and I'm going to have a good time with my mates, whatever happens. Yeah. It does help.
It does. Okay, and now John Bishop asks, I would like to know all of the Doctor Who actors you have met. Who was your favourite and why? And he'll even allow a top 3, Dave. That might be handy for you.
Wow, okay. Sophie Aldred is definitely up there because the first time I met her, it was when Richard and the committee of which I was on were running the local con, Time Storm, here in 1997. Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Wow. And so we got to spend a lot of time with Sophie, and she was incredibly lovely and very, very friendly. And then when I saw her a year or two ago up in Sydney, again, she remembered that weekend, and she was lovely to talk to again. So Sophie Aldred's definitely up there. Fraser Hines is the one I've been the drunkest with. I'm not sure I'd say that he's necessarily the loveliest person, but he's definitely happy to buy his round and have a good drink with you. Colin Baker, I think, is probably the loveliest one that I've met. Colin is very, very easy to talk to. He's a genuinely nice person, and he actually wants to talk to you not just about, let's talk about Doctor Who. When he's been out there one time, the cricket was on. He was talking to us about the cricket. He talked to us about local sport. He talked about what was going on in the world. He's just a lovely guy, and even at some of the professional events where I've been on a club table, sort of whatever, and other guests have sort of swooped past on the way to the green room, Colin's always happy to sort of stop, have a chat, and go on there. So look, there's a lot of lovely people I've met through the show, but they're the ones that really stand out as just being properly lovely people.
As for me, it's a much shorter list, especially given the answer I just gave to the previous question. But I would say Katie Manning, who I saw twice in 1 year, or maybe once in 1 year and once in another year when I was a younger man. She's just so manic and crazy, and wants to be involved with people, and extroverts like that always make things easy because they can break the ice. And I was quite blown away at a young age to see someone from the show, full stop, but her personality certainly I remember very well. So I'd say Katie Manning.
Yeah, I can remember seeing Mark Strickson. It was the first Doctor Who actor I saw in person when I was 7.5. and the brain still was like trying to compute this idea that actor played that character on TV, and they're a real person. They're in front of me right now. It was properly mind-blowing at 7.
There is a photo, Dave, of you with Mark Strickson and Julie Brennan. You look like their child in the photo. Because you're sitting, it's like a family portrait.
Yes. No, I just don't know what to look or where to look. No, that's very funny. Look, Matthew Waterhouse is one that I haven't really sort of spent a lot of time with in person, but he's such a fan of the show and such an intelligent man, and so at peace with all the just that happened in his time in the show, that he can talk about it in a really interesting and open way that you really feel like, wow, I've got an insight into things out of that one. So, yeah. And
there's a plug for Audio Sirens in 2025.
That's true, yes, he's coming back.
Matthew.
Maybe that's why he was in my mind. Another from Oral Stories in the end. Top 3 movies.
I obviously collated this list, and I was looking at that. I thought, there's no way I can give you top 3 movies. I can give you top 3 historical movies. I might say something like Alexander, which everyone hates, and Gladiator, and Waterloo or something. Or top war movies or something. But top 3. I mean, God, even if I just go to the 1980s, where it was like my era of movies growing up, there's about 24 movies. Dave, it's impossible. If you gave me a genre or a theme, I could do it, but I can't do this.
Yeah, look, I've got a bit of a mental list. So, look, my favourite movie is Empire of the Sun.
Okay.
From Spielberg in the late 80s, starring a very young Batman. That I think is just a wonderful movie. I think it's one of the last movies Spielberg did when the special effects really had to be done in the camera, not via CGI, and it's got some wonderful sort of artistic filming and everything. But it's a great movie, Empire of the Sun. My number 2 is very clearly Good Will Hunting. I just think that's an amazing script, an amazing cast. Hits me in the feels every time, the dialogue and everything. It's just an extraordinary movie. After that, look, a lot of the movies that I'm very fond of are the ones that came out in the 90s for me.
Yes.
They're the ones that hit particularly at the time. A Few Good Men, Cruel Intentions, Jurassic Park. American Pie is probably my favourite comedy. Because, again, I was 18 when that came out, so I was just in the right place at the right time. So they're my top half dozen.
Great. Oscar Groucho, at Oscar Groucho's, asks, is David Burton canon?
No.
No. No, because he just made it up, didn't he?
I think so, yes.
For people out there in the early 90s, a chap called David Burton declared that he was going to be the Doctor in this new indie sort of film version or something not being made by the BBC, but he was going to be the new Doctor Who. And he blagged a car off a car dealership they put on, it was a Proton or something, they put on the side. Proton is driven by the new Doctor Who, and I think he drove around in that for a few months until people perhaps realised that maybe there wasn't a film being made and maybe he wasn't the new Doctor Who. So I don't know, maybe in the comics one day they could draw him in a list of a picture of all the Doctors, a tableau. He could be in there somewhere.
Someone's going to do it one day. I mean, they did the Sharka Doctor in Rogue or whatever it was.
They did.
There'll be something like that. I'm sure at some point someone's going to do the Nick Briggs DWM Doctor as being official, but no.
Okay.
Jaconda Forever writes to say, what are the best/most watchable reconstructions of lost episodes, animations, telesnaps, etc. of the classic series? I'm rewatching the show via BritBox in the US and just realised how few reconstructions they include. Wondering what's worth the investment?
It's a really great question. I think the greatest animation to this day is the Moonbase, simply because they animated it for real. They didn't just sort of draw some stock characters and like sort of puppets just have their joints move and have them walk around the screen against stock backgrounds, which is kind of how the animation works now. The Moonbase is properly animated and it's fantastic. But of that more modern style, thinking in terms of the story plus how they've recreated it, I'd say something like Evil of the Daleks really did it for me. You know, if you don't have Evil of the Daleks, Jaconda Forever, go and buy Evil of the Daleks and the Moonbase. They'd be my two tips.
Yeah, I was going to say the Moonbase as well. I think that is by far the best of the animations they did. It just looks absolutely gorgeous. It's very faithful, and it completes a very good story as well, which helps. Having 2 animated and 2 actual episodes definitely helps as well. In that vein, The Invasion I would also look at, because the 2 episodes there are pretty well done, but they complete a fantastic 8-part story.
And it's still in an earlier animation style before the current look.
Yeah. Of the more modern ones, the Macra Terror is the one that I go to.
Yeah?
I think that although some of the creative decisions to, make the special effects and the model work far better than it actually was, isn't the choice I would make, it does tell the story very, very well.
Yeah.
And it does allow you to watch that story. And I find that the animation, although it may not be accurate, in inverted commas, definitely tells the story. But to go to the unofficial reconstructions, the ones that you need to go onto something like the Daily Motion to watch or the various websites, Marco Polo is the one for me that I've been able to watch all 7 episodes and really got into. I'm not a big fan of those reconstructions, but Marco Polo has enough telesnaps that exist and enough money that was spent on it, enough changing locations that the telesnap reconstruction it maintains its interest, and it's really good to just see and just to look at how a 1963-64 production of Doctor Who did, the tundra, the desert, Peking, all those wonderful sort of things. So they're my picks.
Alrighty, We're All Stories in the End is back to ask, what are your top 3 TV shows which aren't Doctor Who?
Well, my favourite TV show is Blake 7.
Yes.
Look, listeners will probably know that. Rich and I are working through the Space Full of Blake 7 podcast. We will get some more episodes of that out sometime. We have recorded a lot more and we've got enough bait. We'll get them out. But I think Blake 7 is just a wonderful confluence of a great storyteller in Terry Nation, a great writer in Chris Boucher, a great director in David Maloney, music, special effects, and then you've got Paul Darrow, Michael Keating, Gareth Thomas, Jacqueline Pearce, Stephen Greif, just so many wonderful actors playing wonderful characters. It's very, very early semi-serialised arc-based television that people like JMS, Joss Whedon have all talked about as being an inspiration for them.
Yeah.
It's at its best, it's just so good. And I absolutely love it, and it's doing nothing other than telling you a great adventure. It's not pretending to be something it's not, it's just a really good sci-fi adventure. My other 2 are a lot more, well, but they're completely outside of the Doctor Who Blake 7 genre. I, Claudius is another one, which I just think is, again, a superb script with a superb cast. I think that Brian Blessed as Augustus is one of the, if not the best television performances on UK television. And then he's backed up by George Baker as Tiberius, John Hurt as Caligula, Derek Jacobi as Claudius, and a whole bunch of other names in there, Sian Phillips, Fiona Walker, etc., etc. Just a fantastic piece of drama. And my number 3, in a similar vein, is the 1982 Brideshead Revisited, which again is just gorgeous, sumptuous dialogue, filmed on location in Oxford and the countryside and in Venice and in Morocco, and again an amazing cast. It's just, those series are both ones that I could watch over and over again because that dialogue and that performance is just so lyrical and magical and wonderful that I absolutely get absorbed into there. Claudius really hits the historian button in me. Brideshead Revisited perhaps hits the some more personal things for me, just in terms of me and my life. But yeah, they're my top 3, and they're very different.
Yeah, they are very different. Whereas I'm going to go just to the 1990s, which is a great period for me, where I'm in my late teens into my 20s, and I'm going to plump for the X-Files, moving into something like Babylon 5, more of the sci-fi genre, whereas X-Files was, well, it was a lot of things really. It was horror, it was sci-fi, it was fantasy in some ways. And then in that middle period of the 90s, moving outwards again, maybe something like Buffy, which I found very extraordinary to watch at the time too. And I say these thinking of all these other great TV shows I like Battlestar Galactica, or like Californication, or like some of the older things you mentioned, like Claudius. This is almost the what's your favourite movie question again for me, but I'm just keeping it to the 90s, and that X-Files, Babylon 5, Buffy trilogy all sort of run together for me. And that's why maybe I think of it as a fond time to be watching TV.
Yeah. If I was doing top 10, I would absolutely have Buffy and Babylon 5 in there. And for me, Roswell would be the third one that would make out that trilogy for me. I've never watched The X-Files.
Dave, that's terrible.
It was one of those things, I think the combination of it being American didn't really sit with me. I was in my mid-teens when it first came on, and then going into VCE or matriculation, whatever you want to call it, in different countries. And just didn't have time to really get on board with it. And by the time I was probably at uni and ready to watch it, people I knew that watched it were sort of saying, it's had its day, its best years are well past. And kind of like Game of Thrones, where people for years told me, you've got to watch Game of Thrones, and I watched a couple of episodes in isolation. I wasn't blown away by them. And then when we got to the end of it, everyone said, don't bother, it's not worth it in the end. And it's like, okay, so these people that spent 5 or 6 years telling you you've got to watch Game of Thrones, watched the last season or two and went, it's not worth the time investing. I thought,
it really wasn't.
Wow, that's such a turnaround.
It was extraordinary. I've never seen a TV show die in the arse as much as Game of Thrones. The water cooler topic for 5 years, to people absolutely just hating how it ended. It's the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in my life. But I loved Game of Thrones in its first 5 years,
Yeah, and look, a more recent television, or I think for both of us, has been one of the big things that's come out in the last few years. But also Stranger Things was something I didn't get on board with initially.
Yeah.
I was maybe a little bit bandwagon resistant to Stranger Things, but when I did watch the first 4 seasons, I was blown away by 3 of the 4 of them, and even the third season, which I thought was the weakest, I still enjoyed. But some of the surprises and the twists and the payoffs in season 4 of Stranger Things took me back to Blake 7 and Babylon 5 and Buffy, and that real proper reward for effort. I thought that was really good. Yeah. So they're 2 recent series I'm quite a fan of.
Yeah, I love Stranger Things from the start because it was like supernatural stuff in a small town, kids on bicycles. It was like, this is Spielberg. If Spielberg was around today as a young man making something, this is what Spielberg would make. And that was just my youth, watching Spielberg movies. So, yeah.
Christopher Bryant asks, what would give you joy to the world in this year's Christmas special? In other words, what would you really, really love to see?
It's a great question. I'd like to see something that's not twee, that's not, it's Christmas, let's be so jolly. And given it's Moffat and given it's called Joy to the World, I'm just wondering if that is the twist, that's going to be something dark and horrible happens. it's a one-off companion. Maybe he'll bump her off or something. And I'd be quite happy to see that, just to subvert Christmas and turn it on its head, because Christmas isn't particularly my favourite time of year. And all of this said, my favourite Christmas Doctor Who is A Christmas Carol, which is all jolly and stuff, although I guess the lady dies at the end. So I
wouldn't have said that was jolly at all. I would say it's creepy and depressing.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it is. And maybe that's what I would like to see again. Maybe that's just my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I'm similar to you, Rob. I would like to see a good adventure that doesn't feel the need to be saying every 5 minutes, don't forget it's a Christmas special.
Yeah.
I think the best ones that work well are the ones like that. I still think the best Christmas special is the Christmas Invasion, which, although it is called the Christmas Invasion, it's got a few little Christmassy things at the start. Once you're into that adventure, it's basically an adventure.
Yeah.
And it kind of forgets that it is Christmas. That's the sort of tone that I would like to see. I would like to see the Ncuti Gatwa Doctor get a real chance to shine on his own, because of the various different shooting commitments and the Doctor Light episodes and all the rest of it from last time. I don't think we've really had a really strong Ncuti Gatwa solo performance. And so, yeah, I'd like to see that, I think.
Well, given that Moffat wrote arguably the best, if not one of the top 2 or 3 of this last season, having Moffat write the Christmas special bodes well, perhaps, for Ncuti?
Yeah, look, I've often said that Moffat as a standalone writer is excellent. Moffat encumbered with being a script writer and writing half the stories and rewriting the other half. A lot of that didn't work for me. Some of it did, but a lot of it didn't. I think Moffat just writing a fun story is always good. So I'm hopeful.
Alrighty. Oscar Groucho has come back. Oscar loves to draw, does some fabulous sketches. I've shared them with you before, Dave, when he's sent me one and said, look, I've been drawing this.
Yeah.
Oscar Groucho says, suggest me a new art project.
I've got 2 ideas. I think that 2 of the best things visually in Doctor Who are when the classic series goes on location filming.
Yeah.
So I think something that's a homage to Paris or Lanzarote or something would be beautiful. But I think the other thing that's visually stunning about Doctor Who are alien landscapes. So something that's a homage to the 1963 Skaro landscape or something like that, I think would be a really interesting art project. And I say this as someone who knows very little about art.
I'll suggest something different. I've always liked when there's a mashup of classic Who and new Who. A great comic book artist, Eric J, once did me a lovely sketch. It had Tom Baker and David Tennant in it together, and I thought that was really cool. So I'd like to see Oscar Groucho's draw a classic Doctor with a modern Doctor, like maybe Davo with Ncuti, or Pat with Jodie, or something. Just something that juxtaposes 2 images you've never seen together before and might not think of together. Something like that.
Very cool. Our final block of questions comes from Neela's C, who has got some rapid fire questions for us all.
Okay.
So we'll do these as a block. So Rob, you can go first.
Okay.
I will throw Neela's questions at them and get your quick reactions.
All right.
So Rob.
Yes.
Favourite Doctor.
Davo.
Favourite story.
Caves of Androzani.
Favourite companion.
Ace.
Favourite monster villain.
Cybermen.
Favourite titles and theme.
The original Tom Baker credits and the theme.
Favourite season and series.
Season 14, Tom Baker.
Overrated story.
Heaven Sent. Just because it's so popular, it's got to be overrated.
Underrated story.
Kinder. I mention it in every other episode of the podcast.
Most annoying companion.
Ooh, Perry.
Bring back one junked 60s story.
As much as I should say Dalek's Master Plan, I'm going to say The Massacre.
There you go.
There we go. How was that?
Well, there are your answers.
Alrighty. Dave, you're up. Favourite Doctor?
Hartnell.
Favourite story?
The Silurians.
Favourite companion?
Probably Dr. Liz Shaw.
Favourite monster or villain?
The Daleks. They're classic for a reason.
Yeah. Favourite titles and theme?
The original theme and the season 11 late Pertwee titles.
Nice. Favourite season or series?
Favourite season is 7. Favourite series, I oscillate between 1 and 10.
Overrated story?
Look, I'm going to get shot, but I think Genesis of the Daleks is very good, but it's not the number one. A lot of people say it is.
Okay. Underrated story.
Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
Most annoying companion?
It's Amy or Clara?
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with Clara.
All right. Bring back one junked 60s story.
I am going to say Master Plan.
There you go. That was great, Neil. That was a good way to end. I liked that.
It was. So, Rob?
Yes.
That's it.
That's it. We've been here 3/4 of an hour answering your questions. That's been fun.
That has been fun. We do these every couple of years. Just it's a good thing to do in person when we actually can look each other in the eye. And just interact with our fans in a different way.
Yeah. No, it was really good. And thank you to all of you who sent in questions and to all of you who said, I'm thinking of a question and you just didn't get them in on time. Apologies, but we had to have a cut-off.
No, that's absolutely true. We'll do one of these again one day. Maybe, Rob. We end every time we do one of these this way.
Yes.
Maybe you'll come to Melbourne one day.
Maybe I will. I have family in Melbourne, Dave. Well, I should get down there one day.
You know there's always a gin and TARDIS waiting for you if you do.
That sounds good to me.
Excellent. Well, look, we've got a lot coming out over the next little while. We've got a monthly episode. There's always a List Makers not far away. Our talk about Return of the King will happen in December. Mm-hmm. There'll be a Christmas episode hot take in December.
Yes.
There'll be a lot going on. But until then, I've been Dave.
And I've been Rob.
And here we are in Sydney, and we'll speak again soon.
Bye-bye.